Welcome everyone to this What's New session with Fredrik from Snowflake. Fredrik, please introduce yourself and tell me what you do.
Yeah, so hey there. Hey, Robert, and hey, everybody. My name is Fredrik Göransson, and I head up the sales engineering department for enterprises at Snowflake here in the Nordics. That role is really awesome. It means I sit and my team, we sit in this intersection of some of the most advanced tech in the world of data, I would like to say, and the actual needs of customers. And our mission is really to bring those two together, right? So I've been in this business for about 20 years now, and I can definitely tell you that I'm feeling super excited about where the industry is going right now and how it's changing. And this role right here, right now, is really interesting because it feels like we're at this crest of the wave where there's a lot of things happening with data and how it's being used throughout the industries, right? So today I want to talk a little bit about the convergence of data. The convergence of data that we've traditionally seen spread out across silos in organizations with the data that sits outside the doors of the same organizations, the external data, right? And how all of that is coming together in a way that's starting to help us untap true value data, to get to those insights everybody's talking about, to build analytics, fuel businesses, to actually make use of that big data. We know it's out there. Now we just got to figure out how to use it properly, right?
I love your enthusiasm and I echo it. I think it's very easy to listen to naysayers and say it's all the same, but I tend to see what you see, which is that there's a lot of things possible nowadays that weren't possible only a couple of years ago. I think it's been hard to not see Snowflake in the news. So probably everybody has heard the name and know that the company exists, but might not realize exactly what Snowflake is. Are you just a database, or tell me what Snowflake is in your own words.
Absolutely. So for those who potentially missed it, right, missed the news, as you say, about Snowflake, it is this, data platform where we fully reimagined how to build that in the cloud. It's modern, it's managed, and completely rebuilt. So we keep everything from data warehousing and data lake, data science, and data engineering capabilities within this platform, right? So I'm just going to expand on that for a second because that means a lot of things, right? So if you asked me the same question that you just did, let's say 2 years ago, I would probably have talked about the database and the data warehousing and how Snowflake started out with just that thing, right? But over the last 2 years, I would say, we've seen a lot of these puzzle pieces coming together into what we're talking about today, which is the full data platform. But now, I mean, like a data platform where you're not choosing product X for the best data warehousing capabilities, or product Y for the data lake capabilities, product Z for data engineering, and so on. The challenge is that when you do that thing, when you pick these different products for the different needs, all within the same company though, you create a lot of challenges when it comes to bridging data between those products. Or you have incompatibilities, you have challenges in maintaining security and governance across all of them, right? And really just putting the onus of managing all of that onto the organization itself. And very commonly, some quite stressed out teams in BI and analytics, right? Now, so Snowflake, in short, is all about bridging these gaps or silos or whatever you want to call them, right? So we ensure that data can go where it needs to go, and the organization has the tools that are available and usable to work with that data, right? So as opposed to having these, let's say, niche products for data engineering or data science, they're great for those tasks, but the end result is usually that you end up with expert teams that are working with those products. And the really true value of those tools and solutions block from this bigger organization, right? And the reason for that is because they're complex expert tools, right?
Right.
But it's also in part because they are not directly connected to the data that comes from the data warehouse or the data lake, right? So when all of that sits in the same platform, a lot of those gaps are bridged and eliminated, right? Really, so we can make use of that data, even in the expert solutions, right?
I might be reading into it too much, but you're using the word platform a lot here, which is interesting because I might be a bit biased here, but data warehouse conjures up words or an image of a refrigerator sitting in a data center somewhere, and it's just hoarding all the data and warehousing it. But platform makes me think more of a developer ecosystem. Why do you guys use the word data platform instead of data warehouse?
Well, it is just almost what you're alluding to there, to lift the view from that huge data center that holds your clusters of hardware to fuel your data warehouses and so on. The data platform is really what we're seeing here as a way of breaking away from that, breaking away from the confines of that technology and infrastructure, right? So Snowflake, we created the data cloud. Really, we made up that word in a way, but it is a way of describing what the data platform brings to companies, right? It's this global network where thousands of organizations can actually mobilize their data with scale, concurrency, performance, all of those things directly in the platform, right? So it's not just about performance in the data warehouse, or it's not about the scale of data lake, but it's those things combined that brings value that goes beyond those individual capabilities, right?
Right.
So if you look at it as a platform where things like security and scalability, availability is simply built into it from the start, that's where we see customers going, right?
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a kind of a convergence of abilities in one place, maybe something that used to have dedicated services somewhere else, and then you would have your data warehouse, but then you would also have 5 other services supporting it, reporting services and other kinds of things. And also for ETL, that would be something that would be outside of the data warehouse, or at least a separate product and that kind of thing. What does this kind of convergence mean for companies? Is it a good thing to have everything in one place? What are the sort of synergies and benefits of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, this is a biased answer in a way, but it is a good thing because by having it in separate products and having these gaps between those products simply means that we're not getting the data to flow between there. There's a lot of effort involved in moving it between those different solutions or products and silos of data within the organization, right?
Right.
So that is the purpose of a platform in there. So the convergence of data, and it's funny enough, we see a lot of our customers on the journey here. And a lot of them are actually starting out with solving the challenges, the core challenges that they have in data warehousing, which is why we made such a good start on the market, right? But they wanted to solve those challenges they had of performance. Maybe they can't get that Friday report to run fast enough, so they have to shut down the organization or the business during that time when they're running that financial report or whatever it might be. It might be the challenges of scale where they're simply they have to choose which data to store because they can't fit it all into the infrastructure they have. Or it's a challenge of price where they have to make balances and say like, well, it's actually not worth spending money on running that query for that workload, right? So if we can solve for that, we've kind of checked off a lot of the challenges, but with data warehousing. But what we're seeing with customers here is that they start out with that, but then they realize that all of these other capabilities, when they sit in the platform, they seamlessly became available to them, right? They could start using the data lake capabilities, the data engineering, the data science capabilities in there. So it's a natural way for them to make that journey towards the cloud, not through piecemeal product moves or lifts and shifts, but as a complete journey towards an organization-wide capability, really.
It's funny here, I'm going to make a bit of a techie joke, but a big focus in algorithm design and real computer science algorithm design is not moving data from processor caches. And it turns out, funny enough, then moving data between different business units is the same kind of design problem that perhaps this aims to really mitigate. But I guess one question then is, many companies are now incorporating data sources that aren't within the company, that might be part of subsidiaries or from entirely external sources. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so let me expand on that a little bit because I think that's really what it all gears up to, right? So internally, we now have this ability to make sure that data is where it needs to be when it needs to be there, right? That's completely opposite to what we've traditionally seen in organizations where they more or less had to adopt their processes, their way of working to the limitations of the technology stack at those times, right? So that convergence of data and bringing in the silos of data, if it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured, different formats and so on, it all comes together there, right? We don't have to see that as a barrier or a blocker for doing it, right? Now, working with internal data sources and, getting that checked off and making sure that we have the access internally is great. But we know that internal data for almost all organizations or really all organizations is not enough. There's everything from business partners outside of the walls of the organization, like vendors, clients, customers, that they need to share data with or get data from, right? So it could be any kind of data that's something like core to our processes or their processes, like updating product inventories or sales metrics or things like that happens on a recurring basis where they need to sync information with these external parties, right? So that's the purpose of having external data in that conversation as well, because it does exist, right, as a need in organizations.
Are not companies already doing this in a way? How is this different?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is not something that's new, right? The companies have been doing this for a very, very long time. I mean, in reality, there is no single business organization that will be able to exist in a data vacuum without any data going in or out. That just doesn't happen. It's not possible, right?
Right, we're building on things.
Yeah, so everybody needs data to either go out or come into the organization. So I think that it is a constant for everybody, right? I think that the challenge is it sits in the effort that goes into doing it, right? So we have all of these different models of doing it today. It could be anything from FTP transfers, API calls, and bespoke integration or service buses and so on. And for each one of these, there's like a varying degree of effort that goes into building it, setting it up, maintaining, monitoring. All of those exchanges, the data has to be handled, right? And on both sides, both on the sender and the receiver, right?
Right.
So as an example, imagine you have this external data that sits somewhere and it's available over an API, which is very common, right? So if you want that data, the first thing you need to do is in your organization, you have to create a client that calls that API. So you call that API, you pull that data in. Next thing you need to do is now you need to store that data somewhere internally, the data that you just pulled in, so that you can marry it together with your internal data, right? So now you need to stand up a database or a storage of sorts for that. And all of a sudden, you've created data silo inside your organization that you now need to take care of, right?
Right.
And just another example of how this actually limits how much we can do of this and the technical limitations of exchanging data is what happened to banks a couple of years ago. The Open Banking Directive kind of hit a lot of banks quite rapidly, right? It simply meant that they were mandated to give access to consumer banking and transaction data to third parties on behalf of their customers, right?
Right.
What they did, some of the banks, they went ahead and built APIs directly on top of the actual data that was sitting in their banking systems. They didn't expect at that point was that the usage patterns of those now third-party consumers of the data completely different from the internal usage and the internal consumers of that data that they were used to and that they were scaled for, that they were performing for, right?
Right.
So the result was that when external access was starting to hit those APIs, the performance and availability of the production systems where that API was pulling the data from was affected to the point where they have to pull the APIs down and re-architect the entire solution, right?
Right.
The conclusion there is that if there is a significant effort that goes into exchanging data, you are very likely to keep that exchange to a minimum. You're only going to be doing bare minimum, only what you need to do, not what you would like to do or what you can do in terms of getting data in or out, right? So
this is a bit of a recurring theme that we're seeing here, where I think a couple of years ago people were preoccupied with really trying to measure the benefit of these platforms in quantitative terms, which is a good thing, but maybe in terms that were, very technical, despite saying that everything needs to be business justified, but like how fast is a query or how fast is, some dashboard, whereas things like lowering the barriers to efficient work is maybe a much better metric. And those kinds of things aren't always KPIs even. So like people haven't even thought to think about the ease of doing business. One thing that I think is neat in Snowflake is the marketplace, because you're talking about the ease of accessing data. You know, not everybody has a team that can set up APIs and that kind of thing. Can you talk about the marketplace a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go from the point where marketplace is really just about taking this one step further, right? So if you start with the point where we now have the ability to, first of all, work with data, seamlessly inside an organization, it goes where it needs to be, and there's really no real effort involved in facilitating that, which is not really a small feat in itself, getting that working, but that is what the platform is all about, right? The second step is what I just talked about, is getting that external data from partners, vendors, suppliers, and so on. They sometimes have overlapping needs with you, sometimes even processes that are connecting or intertwining, right? Where data goes into them or back and so on, right? And usually you have a relationship with those kind of actors. But the next step would be if we consider the data that could be sitting completely removed from us, the data that's coming from sources where you don't really have a relationship established, right?
Right.
It could be these kind of providers of data that's usable to a wide group of organizations. So it could be anything like very basic data like weather data, geographic data, socioeconomic data, or even detailed financial, and credit data, tick data from the stock market, and so on. Mm-hmm. The key, or the common thing here is that that's data that's going to be pretty much the same no matter who looks at it, right? So there is no point for you as an organization to create a unique relationship with that provider. I can say, like, this is exactly the data that you need to produce for me. You can actually produce it as a marketplace provider for a wide range of consumers, right? So there's really no point in establishing that specific relationship with these providers for organizations, as long as there is a contract of how that data is being delivered, if there's an SLA for when it's updated and so on.
Right.
But most importantly, there needs to be a delivery mechanism so that it gets easy for everybody to start using that data, right? So again, about bringing down the barriers for doing these things. Now, if you do that, I think that's the way to make the data easily accessible, and you can start using it in a lot more context, right? So it's again about bringing all of the right data to the place where it needs to be for us to do insights for analytics and so on, to machine learning, right?
Right. Is this a trend that's happening, or is it merely a nice to have feature? What is the future that you see in all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, marketplaces, if we start with that, but I think it doesn't end with that, right? Marketplace is just the last step here, right? But we've actually seen marketplaces from different providers. It could be existing providers, although it's been out there. It's nothing that's really unique to Data Cloud from Snowflake, right? We see market data providers, and we've seen big cloud providers standing up marketplaces of their own, right, to provide data sets to consumers. The difference, I think, that's in here with how the Data Cloud approaches is both in terms of reach and availability of those marketplaces, and combine that with the silo effects of different platforms. So if we first consider what sits on the market data providers, there are some of them that offers like aggregated marketplaces and data sets on those. For them, it becomes really a question of delivery mechanism. How do you get that data into the organization? Since they themselves don't have a data platform attached to them, you end up almost like what we talked about before, with the need for building API clients and so on, and building internal databases to hold that data once you pulled it in, right?
Right.
So again, effort required, meaning limited use, right? Or actually that you're not doing it to the extent that you would like to. And if you look on the other hand on the large cloud providers, they do have a built-in delivery mechanism often, right? But here we have the other challenge of the silo effect of the platform that they are sitting on. So by sitting on one of those platforms, it actually limits the reach and availability of that data to anybody that sits within the same platform. But if you go outside of that, you're not going to have access to that through the same delivery mechanism, right? So let's say that you as your organization run a provider A, but there's this awesome data set that sits out on platform B, you're not going to, easily be able to access that without, again, building API clients and so on. And you're back
Right.
again into effort.
Square one.
And you're not,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's where I see that the data cloud marketplace differs a little bit because we span across all of that really. So bringing down barriers is all what it's what it's all about, even here, right?
That's pretty cool, and I can tell that this is pretty forward-leaning in terms of making it more than just a data warehouse and turning it into a data platform where you have to take into account the delivery mechanism and a lot of other things to be able to provide applications that are actually, scalable, available, reliable, and that kind of thing. So this is super cool, and a neat what's new with Snowflake. Thanks a lot, Fredrik, for joining us today. I hope everybody thought this little session was fun to listen to, and please get in touch with Fredrik if you have any other questions. Thanks, everyone.